Yesterday was our family's first day back at school, so I was a bit busy running technical support and serving as an emotional resource for the first several breakdowns of distance learning. At the end of the day, I reaped the benefit of a lot of snuggles and wrestling time with my kids. I love my children, and when things are going well, the kind of love that I have for them as a father may just pass for common decency. Feeding them, clothing them, providing shelter, playing with them, teaching them life skills. These are all things that a loving parent does. But as a point of fact, there are many parents who aren't particularly loving who do those same things, more or less. Now, before we get ahead of ourselves, there are people who love their children that struggle to do those things for them. They may work very hard to provide the basic necessities and be unable to devote additional time to play. They may be highly present in the day-to-day life of their child, but struggle to provide the basic necessities. But generally speaking, both loving and unloving parents will pursue these things for their children to some extent or another. If things are going well, you may not always be able to, especially as an outside observer, tell the difference between a loving parent and an unloving one. I say all this to help us think through this idea. Sometimes the love of a father only becomes apparent when things haven't gone according to plan. It's when life slides off the rails for our children that we have the most opportunity to express our love for them. This is also where we might struggle to find ourselves patient enough to do so. Jesus tells a story about a man and his two sons. One of the sons, the youngest, asked his father for his share of the inheritance. He wasn't interested in waiting until his father had passed to make a go of it in the world on his own. In fact, he wasn't interested in living in his father's house at all anymore. When the father gave him a share in all that he had, the son left home, went to a distant country, and spent every last dime that he had. The country he had gone to ended up falling into a famine. Now, penniless and destitute, the son sold his services to a pig farmer. And as he contemplated the food of the pigs, thinking how it would be better to eat like them than to starve, he realized that back home, his father's servants were unlikely to be starving the way he was. He knew that returning to his father's home with the expectation of a warm reception was unlikely or foolish. But he could plead to be a servant in the house that he'd formerly called home. What the son didn't know was that his father's great concern for him carried him to the hilltop, where he could see travelers coming to him from a great distance. And each day he waited, hoping for his son to return. And when the father saw the son in the distance, he ran to meet him. And the father embraced his son, greeted him with a kiss. The son, likely caught off guard by the warm reception, began to recite a speech he'd been working on. "My father, I have sinned against God and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants." But the father, ecstatic over his son's return, was already busy making arrangements for the welcome back feast. "Quick! Grab the best robe and ring. Kill the fatted calf and prepare the fire to roast it. Today we will feast. My son has returned. He was lost, but he's found. He was dead, but he has come back to life." We can look at this part of the story and clearly see the father's love here, in this moment, under the circumstances that had previously been dire. The father is able to take action that contrasts with the choices the son had made. We see love played out in big, bold letters because the situation would seem to favor a harsh rebuke of his son rather than a loving embrace. Now, the story shifts back to the other son, the one who had been quietly in the background of the story this whole time. He sees the celebration that is happening, the triumphant return of his wayward brother, and he's having none of it. "Father, I've been faithful to you this whole time. I've served in your household and never once strayed from your home. Why aren't you celebrating me?" And the father responded to him, "Son, don't you understand? My whole household was here for you. I've held back nothing from you. What's mine is yours. But your brother hasn't been here. He was lost and is found. He was dead and is alive." I love you. And here's the message I hope that you hear in this story today. God loves all of his children. If your life seems to be on autopilot, it may be difficult to see just how great God's love for you is. His constant provision may simply be taken for granted. If you're currently experiencing difficulties of your own making, you may be fearful to turn to God because you think he'll reject you. But in either case, know this: God loves you. There's nothing you've done, no distance you've traveled, no amount of reckless living that he can't forgive to show you his love. And if God hasn't had to make a grand gesture to usher you back into his home because you've always been there, don't let that security lull you into a sense that God's love is any less ecstatic for you than it is for your brothers who have needed to make the journey home.